Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So, I remember the first car I'd ever bought was a 95 Ford Ranger. It was the first car I'd ever got from a dealership anyhow. And I remember I was test driving these different vehicles, and I went to my boss, and I'm like, man, I totally love this big old Chevy. I'm going to get it. It's this big old tires and wheels. And he says, yeah. He says, well, what about them Ford Rangers? You know, I drive a Ford Ranger. It's a pretty decent rig, pretty reliable, good on gas. And I was like, a Ford Ranger, an old grandpa car, you know. But I ended up buying that Ford Ranger anyway, and it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made because I drove that Ford Ranger for 300,000 miles. Now, the thing about that Ford Ranger is that when he came to me and he says, hey, since you bought that Ford Ranger and you're prepared to make those Chevy payments, why don't you go ahead and make the Chevy payment towards that Ford Ranger? How much would it be, you know? And I was like, well, you know, you're right. So I started throwing an extra $100 a month towards that Ford Ranger, and I paid it off 14 months early. Now, that wasn't the only thing. I had made so many overpayments towards this Ford Ranger that I was able to skip a month. I was able to, like, you know, Christmas or vacation would come up or something, and I was able to not make those truck payments because I had made so many overpayments that I didn't have to make a payment for, you know, for several months. So it was kind of like having money in the bank, so to speak, by making all these overpayments. And then I saved a ton on, you know, by making these principal payments and not have to make any interest payments on that principal. So making those overpayments was like one of the best things that I had ever done when I bought that Ford Ranger, and I bought in all my vehicles that way. I've always made overpayments towards them. And I find that it is not the case nowadays. When I talk to people about the vehicles they buy, they always seem to go for the most expensive vehicle that they could possibly afford. They go for these vehicles that are like, you know, $400 or $500 a month. And I'm thinking, you know, did you ever think about getting maybe like the, you know, the $350 a month car and then make $500 a month payment towards it? And people look at me like, what are you, nuts, you know? And I was just like, well, why isn't it like that? And I realized it's all about the status, right? It's all about how good I look in my car, how good I look when I dress, how good I look in my house, my big beautiful house. And this is the reason why they take out so much debt, is because they're not trying to go for something sensible that says, hey, this is gonna, you know, get me around and be good on gas. I don't care what it really looks like. They care nothing about that and only care about what it looks like. I need to have the big badass vehicle that I look good in when I'm driving. And so this is one of the reasons that you're seeing so many delinquencies on these debts, is because the status symbol that they are trying to carry is not as important as actual functionality. So if this car was an actual just functionality towards them and not a status symbol, then they would have bought something that they could afford and they wouldn't be so worried about letting it go or being delinquent on it. One of the other things that I'm starting to see is that student loan debts are starting to have the screws put towards them. Right? So this debt is becoming a very big burden. Not only there's, you know, people are delinquent on their cars, they're delinquent on their credit cards, they're delinquent on student loan debts, and these student loan debts they're locked into. They can't even walk away from them or declare bankruptcy or anything. They are locked in on these student loans, and they're now starting to put the screws to them. They're starting to ask for that money back. They're sending collection agencies after them. They're going after going after garnishing wages. They're going after Social Security benefits. They're going after, you know, income tax returns. They are going to get that student loan debts. And since they locked you into it and it's now gotten up to $1.5 trillion, they can now go ahead and put the screws towards it. Because if people get worried about taking out student loan debts and having, you know, these collection agencies come hammering down onto them, they may not want to take out the student loan debts. Now, if they had that issue going on back in the day, then you probably never would have saw the growth to $1.5 trillion. But then they never would have got them trapped in there to begin with if they had done that. So this, to me, was a setup. I hate to be conspiracy about it, but that's what it very much seems to me, is that they went and offered all these kids all this money to go to school, pushed them into it, told them that they weren't going to have a decent life or career if they didn't go to school, pushed them in there, gave them a heck of a lot of debt to deal with, locked them in on it, and now they're starting to, come on, give us the money. Give us the money. Uneducated Economist. We'll talk to you later.